Hello everyone, if you've been watching the news recently, you might have noticed that the US has a bit of a UFO problem, and I thought today we might waste a bunch of our time making a UFO tracking application. Now this isn't like one of those tinfoil hat apps, unless you want it to be. We're actually just tracking the objects that the US has been decommissioning recently. So we can see here, this is the one that was spotted over, I guess, Lake Michigan. Technically, it was decommissioned over Lake Huron, but, you know, it's 5 in the morning. What do you want from me? So we're going to be making this. Basically, you can create a bunch of coordinates. If you, like, edit a sighting, you have a list of coordinates you can add. And then afterwards, it gets converted into a GeoJSON object that gets displayed on a Mapkick map. And then we can come back here to, like, all of our UFOs, and for each of them we can, you know, add in a bunch of additional information with like rich text and WYSIWYG editors and stuff. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and we'll CD out of our demo, and I'll go ahead and I'll start the timer. We'll F11 here. We will CD in, or we'll do a Rails new video with a -J of ES build and a -C of bootstrap just to make it look a little bit prettier. Now for this, we're going to be using quite a few different resources. One is this travel restriction page here, which was issued for the Lake Michigan travel info. There's also going to be one for the one that happened over Lake Huron and all the other places. The reason why I went with this one is because it's like the US version. I don't think the US had a travel restriction. I know this isn't really like Rails related, but it's stuff that we have to consider. So I'm using the US information here, but basically I'm just pulling this, and then we're going to be using, let's go ahead and do a code dot. We're going to be using the Mapkick gem for this, which is made by the people that made Chartkick, which is that charting software we've used before. Let me go ahead and hit F11, or hit Control plus a couple times, and then hit F11. So the actual gem for that, I think, is called something like gem Chartkick or Mapkick-RB. We also need the gem for Cocoon. We're going to need the gem for simple form, and we're going to need the foreman gem because I'm still on Ruby 3.2, and I think that comes from the GitHub page for it. I'm using GitHub Copilot, by the way, if you're wondering where all of that autocomplete's coming from. We're going to go ahead and we're going to run this, and then we can come over to the Cocoon page, and you can see what the setup for this is. In my case, I already know what it is. We need to add a yarn add for this Cocoon package, I guess. Go ahead and put a space here. We'll go ahead and run this. That gives us that. We also need jQuery, which I have open here. You can go over to Google and find this. And for this one, we are just going to put this in the app.html page right up top here. Save that. We then need to take the coordinates from this page, and we need to convert them into GPS coordinates. The way that I did this was I went over to ChatGPT, I grabbed the statement, and then I said, parse these coordinates out. And it gave me the coordinates. So right now it's going to be typing all of that. We can come over here and we can go over to the next section. So basically this is going to spit out some military grid reference system coordinates, which we then need to convert to latitude and longitude. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to automate this part, but what we can do is we can come into our terminal here and we can generate the migrations for all of these. So to start, we're going to have to create a Rails-G scaffold. This is going to be for the actual UFOs, and the actual UFOs are going to have a couple things. They're going to have a name. A description is going to be action text. They are going to have a status of type string, I believe, and I think that's about it, but I need to check my migrations here just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. That looks right. Go ahead and run that. Next, we're going to have the sightings. We're going to do a Rails-G scaffold for the sightings. Each sighting will belong to a UFO. It also have a date of type date, a time of type time, and then a UFO : belongs to. That should create that one. Next, we want to create the latitude and longitude for the coordinates. So we're going to say Rails-G scaffold coordinate. Each coordinate will have a lat, and that'll be of type, I think I had it of type string, but this can actually be of type integer. It'll have a long of type integer as well. It'll also have a sighting : belongs to, just like that. We can now go ahead and do a railsdb:/migrate just to make sure we didn't mess all of that up. Looks like that worked. We need to do a railsg simple_form:install command with the bootstrap flag. That'll install that. Next, we need to come back over to the Cocoon real quick just to make sure that I didn't skip an installation step here. It doesn't look like I did. The one thing we do need to do is come into our app JavaScript application. And inside of here, what we want to do is import the Nevada Cocoon, or Nathan VDA Cocoon. I don't know why I keep saying Nevada, reading is hard. Once we have that, we can now use Cocoon in our application, which means we have to come into our models. So we'll come into the models and we'll go into the UFO. We'll have to start in here because this didn't get created with everything else. And then in here, what we need to do, I need to find the actual model notes here. So inside of our UFO, we need to create a couple things. I'll hit Control B to hide this. So in here we have a has many sightings, a rich text for the description, and then also has the statuses, which are either set to active, inactive, or decommissioned. And we can even change these to be capitalized just so that we can hopefully use these. I don't know if my formatter will change this. Doesn't look like it did. Okay, so now we can come into our sighting, and this is where we actually do some of the fancier stuff, because this is where we use the Cocoon for our nested attributes. So it does belong to a UFO, but then also has many coordinates of dependent destroy. It has nested attributes that it accepts. It accepts for the coordinates. It rejects if they're blank, and it allows destroy of true, which allows you to destroy these. Okay, so that takes care of that. Next, we have to come into our coordinates just to make sure this is fine. This looks good to me. So now let's come into our sightings controller, because inside of our sightings controller, we have to do some extra stuff. The first thing we want to do is on the new page here, we need to create a sighting. Otherwise, we won't have any when we first load the page, and we're probably going to have to, or we're going to have to create some coordinates when we first load the page. That way we can, actually edit the first one, because we're always going to have at least one coordinate, I would assume. Unless it hasn't been shared with us, but that would be kind of weird. Next, we want to come into the params here. We want to change these, and what we'll do is we'll just put these on new lines for each one, just so it's a bit easier to read. So we have the UFO ID, the date, the time, and then the coordinate attributes, which is the latitude, the longitude, and the destroy. Next, because of how the Mapkick thing works, it does require you to have a geolocation or geo coordinate. And these are kind of weird. Basically, it's like the inverse of what you would expect. So we do need to actually create something to make these. So we're going to create a helper method here with some GeoJSON. This takes in some coordinates. This is just a mapping of the coordinates, and it's actually the longitude, latitude that kind of messed with me for a bit. So we do have to reverse these. And then because of how it expects the map to function, when we create this map area, we do need to add the first coordinate back to it. Because if you think of the map as having like 4 points, right? We need to go from this location to this one, to this one, this one, to this one, to this one, to this one, and then back to this one. So we need to go back to the original starting one to close the polygon. Otherwise we get a weird triangle. So we map all of these, and then we just add the first one back into it. We then create an object here. This has some geometry of type polygon. It takes in the coordinates. It's just my formatter gets rid of them. Then has a tooltip, a label, and a color of green. These are just coming from our sighting.ufo.whatever, right? So that takes care of that. Next, let's come into our UFO controller, because we do need to add in the rich text here with a description. So that'll work there. We now need to come into our views, and we need to finish up. So inside of our views, we need to do in the UFOs, the form here after the field name. First things first, let's change this over to a simple form, just like this. We'll hit tab once this is done. I don't think we're selling UFOs here, so that's kind of weird. Let me come over to the form for the UFO form. I have to check this on the other page. We do have a render for the errors here. We're going to create a shared errors. So we're going to right click on views, new folder, call this shared. And then inside of that shared folder, we're going to create a new file, call this _error_messages.html.erb. Now inside of this error messages.html.erb file, we basically just want to do something like this. We check if the object that we get provided has any errors. If it does, we create a div with an ID of error explanation. We pluralize the object error count. So if it's 1, it says it has 1 error. If it's 2, it says it has 2 errors. We then say this prohibited the object from being saved, and then it just lists out the errors. So that just goes through the object's full errors.each and lists it out. Okay, cool. So that takes care of our error partial. Now let's come back over to our UFO form. We do have this input for the description, but if I recall correctly, we can go ahead and do a bin/dev to start our server. When we come over to localhost port 3000, well, let's create a home page. We'll say railsg controller pages home, just like that. Go ahead and run that now. Oops, now let's come into our routes.rb and let's change this get to a root, the slash to a hash, and then we should be good to run a bin/dev again to start our server. Let's go over to localhost port 3000 again. Hopefully this loads up sometime this year. But of course, Brave always gets stuck here because it's arguably the worst browser I've ever used. Okay, so we have the home page. Let's come into the actual page's home page right now. And then on the home page, we want to just create a couple links, which we can do right here. We're just creating a button group for the sightings, a link to the sightings path so we can see all of the sightings. We're then creating a new sightings link, and we're changing the div class for each of these, or the link class for each of these. We're then creating the UFOs link and a new UFO path. So that just gives us a couple links to play with. So this lets us navigate our application to see our sightings and our UFOs. So if we come over to your UFOs, create a new UFO, this is where we run into the issue where it's trying to render this form.object. So we have to come back into our form here and change this to just be a f.object. That should allow us to get through there, but now our input description is messed up. So now we have to come over and we have to look for action text for the simple form. And this should take us to a link where we have a simple form issue, I think. And then in here, this should be the rich text area that you need to implement, but I can never remember where you put this. Custom app inputs, since app, you also need to add the app inputs. Where does this go? This is going to go in, I can't remember. Let me scroll down to the bottom maybe. Let's see. Is it just rich text area? I can't recall if this just works now. I don't think it does. So we do need to come up here and find, oh, that's what it was. It was, I think, as rich text area, something like that. And now if we refresh, does that work? For this, we need to do the railsg action underscore text :install command, I believe. And we can do a railsdb :migrate command to migrate our database. That should allow us to have that set up. And now we can do a bin/dev, and then hopefully either this works or we need to do a comma as rich text area, something like that. Refresh, there we go. Now we have our WYSIWYG editor, so we can type text into here about the UFO, and maybe we do something like Michigan 1, aliens 0, right? Let's just bold our text, and let's just unbold the aliens because they're kind of cringe, and we'll just bold the scores maybe, I guess. We'll do something like that. Okay, so we give this a name, Michigan something, I don't know. We give it a status. The status does need to be a collection that we are selecting through. So for the input here, we want to do something where it's like a form input for the status. A status with the collection UFO statuses.keys, include blank false, and then the default should be. Okay, we'll then change this to a form. Sorry, something just happened. And then we should be good to select through these. So what we do is we say f.input status collection UFO statuses keys include blank default of active, and that takes us here, and that seems to be working. So now let's do another one. We'll just say I don't know, we'll call this Michigan, I don't know, set it to active. We'll say Michigan with a control B of 1, aliens with a control B of 0, and now we can create this UFO. That seems to work, but now inside of our UFO underscore UFO partial, after the status, we do need to include the description, but this needs to be inside of a div and not inside of a actual description block. Go ahead and do that, refresh, there we go. That gives us a rich text. Now let's come into our application.html.erb file, and in here let's do a .container.mt-5 for bootstrap to give this some padding. That moves everything over in the entire application. We have included jQuery, so that's good. Next, let's come into, we can go ahead and close some of these. The next place we want to come into is going to be our sightings and our sightings form. So inside of our sightings form, we need to do quite a few things because this is where a lot of the magic happens. So we do need to full screen here. We want to change this to a simple, simple form. We're going to let GitHub Copilot do this. Simple form for the sighting. This does have a UFO ID that we're selecting from. This is going to map the UFO name to the UFO ID with an include of blank, so that lets us check those. We then have a time, and we need to have a f.input for the date. Date. We'll move the date above the time. We then have the latitude and longitude, but for those, we don't want to actually do this. I don't know why animals are included here. Maybe this was like, maybe GitHub Copilot's pulling from like a list of cow abductions or something. So let's go ahead and let's do a .coordinates block for our div. I don't know how important the CSS is here to match, but I think Cocoon does check based on like the class names. So do make sure to at least match it up initially and then maybe refactor it if you're following along. We are going to render a partial, call it coordinates/fields. It takes in a form of f with a coordinates form. So this is going to render some fields for us. And then below this, we can actually create the link to add a new association. So outside of our for each here for the simple fields for, we create a link to add an association, which just has a text add coordinate, takes in the form for the coordinates, and then it takes in a partial, which is the partial we're going to be rendering whenever we click the add button, which is this partial right here. And then finally, we give this a button of success. So let's go ahead and let's create this. This goes inside of our coordinates. So inside of our coordinates folder, right click new file, underscore, and we called this the underscore fields.html.erb. Inside of the underscore fields, what we want to do is, let me find the coordinates folder over here. Inside of the fields, we want to create the fields for the coordinates. Each one is inside of a div with a nested fields class. We then have the field for each input. One's for latitude, one's for longitude. And then finally, we have the remove link, which is a link to remove the association with the text of delete coordinate, the form object of f, and the class of button danger. So let's go ahead and save the fields for. We can now save the form here. Because at this point, our form is largely done. The only other thing I want to change here is the submit button. So it'll say submit with the class of button primary. So that takes care of that. Now, if we come over here and we refresh, we can go back to the UFO or go back to the home page even. We'll go back to the home page. We'll go over to the sightings. We'll create a new sighting. And if we click on this, we can see we have a unidentified method here for the UFO ID. So we do need to make sure this matches what we're expecting. I'm going to refresh, but I think it's going to be a little bit upset here because this is also going to require the F input. So if we do that, and then let's change this one to the F as well, so that all of these match. Let's go ahead and refresh now. Our F submit down here needs to change. This is why you don't refactor while you're doing these. So now we have the UFO by name, the date selection. This happened yesterday, so on the 12th. And this happened at, let's check in here. There is a time included, 17:02, so like 5:02 p.m. I guess, if you want to go that way, or I guess it's 17:02 because it's the same type. Okay, so now we have our coordinates here, and the way we want to add these, we'll just start with a 1, 2, 3 and a 1, 2, 3. We can click add coordinate, it creates a new one. We can delete these and we can submit these. And I think by submitting these, if we now edit it, we should see these by default. So that's pretty cool. The only other thing we do need to check, if we add another one, we'll say 456, 456, we'll submit. If we now edit these, do we have both of those? We do. Okay, cool. So now what we want to do is we want to stop our server because now we have to do some of the hard parts. So we have to come over to the Mapkick GitHub page, wherever that is. I don't know if I have it open. We'll just search for Mapkick. And we'll come down to the chartkick.com/mapkick. I have a link to all of this stuff in the video description. This tells you to go over to Mapbox and create an account. You want to come over there and you want to log in. I'm already logged in on the other page. Once you're logged in, you're going to want to come over to the page that shows you where your API key is. So if we come over here, I'm just going to drag this over. I'll go ahead and share it. I'll delete it after the video. So you come down here and you're going to see that you have a default public token. You want to copy this token, and now you want to do a, let me full screen this. You want to do a editor editor equals code dot space dash dash wait for Rails credentials colon edit. That should open this up in VS Code, hopefully at some point. And then inside of here, you want to do a Mapkick colon, and then you want to have like the API key, and then you want to paste in the actual API key. Once you do this, remember what you put here, Mapkick API key. You can go ahead and close this. That'll tell it that this saved. Next, I need to open up my notes again. We want to come into our development.rb. So this is going to be inside of our config environments development.rb. Inside of here, what we want to do is we want to have a environment for the map access token, which we have to set, and we set that equal to the Mapkick, and then I think we had it as API key as our second argument inside of the Rails application credentials dig. Once that's done, we now have that set up. We do need to come into our gem file real quick because I don't remember if we added, we did add the Mapkick gem. So at this point, we can go ahead and do a yarn add for whatever the Mapkick gem requires, which looks like it's just Mapkick. That'll add that to our yarn package. We can now go ahead and do a bin/dev. We do need to import this inside of our app JavaScript application.js file, app JavaScript application.js. Go ahead and import that. We also have Cocoon in here already. Now what we want to do is we want to come into our DB and our seeds file because we want to seed the database so that we don't have to use this over and over again. If you use one of these GPS coordinate editors, you should be good to go here. I'm going to use my pre-created seed data. This just has a UFO create with a name, a description, and a status. So we create the UFO. We then create the sighting for it, which we do right here. And then after we create the sighting, we can then create the coordinates for it by just putting in the actual coordinates. I do need to change these to not be strings because unfortunately in the demo version, these were set to strings. Doing a bit more of live refactoring, just like that. So now we have all of these. Let's go ahead and let's stop our server and let's do a Rails DB reset command that should run our seed file. And then we can do a bin/dev to restart our server. If that's done, we should be good to refresh and go to sightings/1. Now the sightings/1 here doesn't list any information. So what we want to do is inside of our sightings partial in our views, sightings, and our sighting partial right here, we can go ahead and add the remaining information. We have the UFO ID. We do have a sighting date if we're using that, if we're interested in that. And then finally, what we want to do is below the time and I guess the UFO, let's change this to the UFO name maybe. So below this, we'll come into the sighting.ufo.name. In here, what we want to do is we want to check if the sighting has any coordinates. If it does, we want to list these out by doing sighting.coordinates.each, or we do a list item for the coordinate.lat, the coordinate.long with a pipe, and then a link to edit that coordinate if it's incorrect. So by doing this, we should be able to come over here and refresh. We now have our coordinates that we seeded the database with, but of course, I forgot this actually needs to be a decimal and not an integer. So let's come into our migrations. And let's come into the migration for the coordinates and change these to a decimal. Go ahead and save this. And now if we do a Rails DB reset, we can then do a bin/dev to restart our server. And if we come over to sightings/1, as soon as Brave decides to work as well as like the 18 other browsers that are available on the internet, it looks like this is still not giving us the decimals for some reason. So let's go ahead and let's do a Rails DB drop, Rails DB migrate, Rails DB seed to seed our database, do a bin/dev. I did save this, right? Looks like it's saved. It's set to decimals. So let's come over to coordinates. There we go. That worked. We now have these. Let's come back to our sightings. We have all of them listed. Let's now do the map and call it a day. So we'll come into the sightings.html.erb. And in here, we use that helper we created earlier to create an area map with the GeoJSON helper that we created inside of our helper. And then we pass in this specific sighting. Let's come over here. Let's refresh in full screen. Takes us to a map. It has the UFO active status. I'm going to go ahead and press 1 here. We do see it's active. We can change it to decommission if we'd like. Gives us the area. It is set to green, just like we have it set to in the helper. And now we have the ability to track these things. So So if we come back to our sightings real quick, we can just, or I guess if we come back to our homepage, I'll come over to localhost port 3000, hit F11. We can come over to the UFOs. We can show this UFO. This, of course, you know, just sort of gives us a description of it. If you wanted to, you could include a link to all of the sightings or something. But I think we're pretty good now. Maybe we want to do that. I'll just go ahead. I'll start the timer real quick. So that was like 25:46. Let's come into our, our UFO, our underscore UFO page, I guess. And then inside of here, we can do something like, if it has any sightings, we can do a link to the sighting. And then maybe if you want to, you can even render the map if you're interested. So below the sighting, you can do something like a area map that takes you to the GeoJSON for that specific sighting. Or you could even combine all of these into one if you'd like. But now we have all of these in here. If we come to our UFOs page, if we come to our UFOs page, we can then come in here, and after the P tag that wraps all of this, we need to do a N tag, which should clean that up. And now in our UFO page, we have the description, which is rich text, and we have all of this. So if we click on this UFO, show this UFO, edit this UFO, we can come in here, we can change this to Michigan won against the aliens, and we can change this to decommissioned, update this, takes us back to the map, and now if we hover over this, it says decommissioned, and we can see that the text changed. All right, so that was about 27 minutes, or 26 minutes, I guess. Nevertheless, pretty cool. Uses a map API, stores all of this in a server, lets you do all of that other cool stuff. Hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully you found this enjoyable. And hopefully I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.